What is the second coming of Christ going to look like? What are both the end times as well as Christ's resurrection here on earth going to look like? In this video, I'm going to be deep diving into why and how and what this could look like, particularly through a natural and evolutionary psychological perspective. So is Christ going to come back to earth as the man he was 2,000 years ago? Or is it something different? What if it is the idea of Christ, or what Christ stood for, or the symbol enveloped in Christ manifested throughout culture and society? What if the resurrection and second coming of Christ was the emergence of Christ consciousness throughout society and individuals? The culture got pushed and divided in a very drastic way over the past 50 years, and there's a steady incline of genuine curiosity towards Christ and Christianity for that matter. However, there is a decline with institutional religion at the same time. Now, what is the outcome of this? The outcome of this is that people are going to have authentic faith. People are genuinely yearning for an authentic relationship with the divine and with source, and you can't necessarily do that through institutional religion. It's a slippery slope because institutional religion is brought to you by man, but our flesh has a predisposition for power and greed. There's a very selfish aspect to the human race. Therefore, the only true religion is a personal religion with source that's authentic and genuine and truthful. Practically anything outside of that is a farce and has the possibility and likelihood of damage, both culturally, individually, and communitively. The second coming of Christ, the resurrection of consciousness, it is not the coming of Christ in the flesh that he was still in. It's not Christ coming down to earth in his flesh, but it is an awakening of consciousness through the frequency that Christ's symbol represents and holds in reality. Truthfulness, generosity, selflessness, honesty, sacrifice, and most importantly, love. The resurrection of Christ's consciousness is through culture and through society. The return of Christ isn't necessarily a particular set point in time, an event in time, but it's a steady, perhaps linear and or exponential rise in awareness and consciousness. So the classical expectation versus the deeper meaning of the resurrection and second coming of Christ is just this. People misconstrue and identify with the idea that Christ will come down in his body as his physical being, and that would be the set point and start of the resurrection of Christ and the second coming of Christ. However, it might be something more particular, an emergence of enlightenment, generosity, and compassion through Christ, and the acknowledgement of what he did on the cross and what his symbol truly represents for us. Many await a literal return, a man in the sky, a man in the clouds. But if the kingdom of heaven is within, as Christ said, then his return must also be within. And this divine pattern often repeats itself. The first manifestation of God in the flesh, aka Jesus Christ, was the seed, and the second coming is the full bloom of the symbol of Christ, and his magnitude and healing force will blossom. And if it doesn't blossom, then we're going to fall apart as a society. It's either we align ourselves with something above us, something divine and something harmonious, or we fall to darkness, corruption, wickedness, and hedonism. If we don't have that sacrificial backbone as people, that selfless backbone, then society within itself cannot function. Christ enveloped himself in the flesh and came to earth to showcase what consciousness could become. And now Christ reappears and is manifested through consciousness itself. The resurrection is a blueprint for cultural awakening. Resurrection represents the transcendence from ego and the awakening of divine identity, and this is on an individual basis. The body rises not just from death, but from ignorance, from identifying solely with matter. We identify with our flesh abundantly, and a lot of the time this gets in the way of our higher purpose and our higher calling. Humanity's current chaos mirrors the crucifixion, the death of false idols, false systems, and fractured identities. What comes after this global crucifixion is the awakening of a unified, Christ-like consciousness that envelops society and envelops Earth. This harmonious push and pull system, this very symmetrical system and force that reality is coming from, is a gift and principle from which God functions. We're going through chaos and turmoil to show how bad things could get and how bad we need harmony, love, compassion, and selflessness. Without our observation and acknowledgement with how bad things are able to get, the respect for a harmonious society is never going to be acknowledged. What sharpens the sword? Molten hot forces and an absurd amount of pressure. And this is exactly what is going to have to happen for society in order for us to fully blossom and take part in Christ consciousness and the symbol behind him and the frequency from source, which we're able to inhabit. Now let's define Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness is the alignment with divine order, truth, love, and unity. Christ consciousness is the awareness and pursuit of harmony and alignment within yourself and within your community and within the broader society. That's truly what Christ consciousness is. It's that level of sacrifice needed to push our civilization forward. Without this innate sacrifice and respect for unity, human ingenuity cannot take place. Christ consciousness is not religious. It is metaphysical. It is the natural state of awakened humanity. The energy of Christ is the archetype of spiritual evolution. Moses brought law. Buddha brought stillness. Christ brought love as the final initiatory frequency. The second coming of Christ is the love frequency manifesting across the human nervous system through science, art, music, and spiritual alignment. The modern resurrection and the surge of Christ consciousness is humanity standing at a threshold of awareness. The rapid exposure to chaos, corruption, wickedness, and deceit is synonymous with the apocalypse. And the apocalypse, especially in the Bible, literally means the unveiling. All human ingenuity, education, social media, knowledge, wisdom, even things like psychedelics and philosophy are tools and instruments of this unveiling. Christ consciousness is returning through a surge of discernment, empathy, and awakened morality. The second coming of Christ is not necessarily Christ's body and himself as an individual returning, but it's Christ re-emerging in the hearts of billions. Now, the evolutionary and naturalistic logic of this, evolution is not only biological, evolution is also psychological as well as spiritual. Every age humanity inhabits has always had a pattern of consciousness. First it was tribal, then it was rational, now it's technological. Our pattern of consciousness is going to be transcendent through the resurrection of Christ in our hearts and in culture. And then perhaps after the transcendent phase of consciousness in culture and in time, maybe we'll reach something approximating enlightenment or complete 100% harmony with ourselves and one another. But that is completely speculation, and that's also in at least a few hundred years. So it's really hard to prophesize. But again, we're going to have to go through horrible times in order to even want something as harmonious as that could be. Christ represents that transcendent phase, the moment when humanity realizes it is one organism animated by one divine intelligence. And as this collective awareness matures, divine consciousness incarnates not in one man, but in the species itself. The second coming of Christ is the awakening of the species to its divine authorship in source. That's the second coming of Christ. And I think we're in the start of it, at least. Perhaps we've been in this process before Christ even came. The egoic, divided world must die for the unified one to emerge. Just as Christ's tomb had to open for his light to shine, human consciousness must open beyond fear and control so that the divine could re-enter reality. Each person has to face the death of their ego, and the removal of self-pride. And this Christ frequency, this Christ consciousness emerges in the people that let their old self perish. You must decrease so he could increase. That's something that my pastor says. The inner crucifixion is not waiting for salvation, but it's actually becoming the salvation itself. And taking up your cross, as Jesus tells us, is not a command to suffer. It's not that at all. It was a code for transcending limitation through surrender and rebirth. And why does all of this matter now? What is the call to action? Like I said previously, society is on the brink of either technological transcendence or complete moral collapse, because the technological transcendence is going to invite a lot of demons into society. And what are we going to gravitate towards? Well, obviously our flesh, which will likely lead us to something approximating moral collapse. The only thing that could guide this power is Christ consciousness, the embodiment of divine wisdom in human form. Every new idea, every moral revolution, every act of compassion is a cell in the body of the returning Christ. The resurrection is not a date and time, but it's a frequency shift, and it's already happening. Maybe the second coming of Christ is not a figure in the sky, but about the sky opening within us. Maybe the resurrection is not about escaping death, but awakening life in its purest form. The Christ doesn't come to humanity. He awakens through humanity. Christ becomes his symbol. The divine did not leave. It has never left. What it's doing is reconfiguring itself. And every time we as people choose truth or unity and love over chaos, the Christ returns again. Maybe the second coming was never supposed to be from the ground looking up, but from the soul looking in. The return of Christ isn't a trumpet in the clouds, though perhaps metaphysically, metaphorically, and symbolically, that is true, but it is the quiet reawakening of divinity within our human hearts and within the flesh. Every time we remember love over fear, truth over illusion, unity over separation, Christ rises again in that moment. The resurrection isn't one moment in history, but it is the internal pulse of awareness remembering itself through us. The kingdom was never somewhere else. The kingdom is here within our code, waiting to be remembered. And maybe that's the secret. A second coming isn't coming at all. It's unfolding. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. I had a pleasure making it. If you guys and gals have any comments or replies you would like to discuss, I'm very happy to discuss them with you. I hope everybody has a good day, good week, good month, and good year. And I will see you in the next one.